have this space together with everyone is really special. So thank you all for making this really smooth and well organized despite the difficult circumstances. So I just want to congratulate and thank you all for this. Okay, so for our very special second plenary speaker for IMOVICCON, I'm very happy to introduce Max Schleser, who is a senior lecturer in film and television researcher in the Center for Transformative Media Technologies at Swinburne University Technology in Melbourne, Australia. He is also an Adobe education leader, and I think we'll hear a little bit about that in his talk today. Max is also founder of the Mobile Innovation Network and Association, and you can look up his work at www.mina.pro at PRO. www.mina.pro is part of what he's working on. He is also the screening director of the International Mobile Innovation Screening and Festival. Max's research expertise are immersive media and creative arts 4.0 with a focus on cinematic VR and interactive filmmaking. Max's research explores research production, emerging media, and smartphone filmmaking for community engagement, creative transformation, and transmedia storytelling. This coming November, Max will also present the 10th edition of MINA, which stands for Mobile Innovation Network and Association. Again, the organization that I just mentioned, mina.pro. He will be presenting the 10th edition of MINA at the International Mobile Innovation Screening and Festival. MINA is the longest running mobile and smartphone film festival in the Southern Hemisphere. And his monograph, Smartphone Filmmaking, Theory and Practice, will be published by Bloomsbury in September. So I'll drop the link to Max's forthcoming book in the chat box shortly. His talk today, the keynote for the day, is Mobile Moving Image Culture and Smartphone Filmmaking, Past, Present, and Future. Max, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Eeps. And yeah, it was really great to meet you 2 years ago. And I still remember we had like a really fantastic lunch. You gave me some really great, you gave me some tips from some VR projects that were happening in LA. And I really enjoyed the conference 2 years ago. It was really great to have great presentations, but also have that continued discussion over some really great lunches, and we had some great dinner. So this is not the best we can do, but it's the second best that we can do. And we in Melbourne, we also went through a difficult time with a lockdown, 111 days. What a funny number. And one of the things that came out of this, I teach smartphone filmmaking, and so at Swinburne University in the film school, all the units had to stop because normally students work in big crews. We work with our Alexa cameras, but except my class, which is experimental screen production, we could continue because we're working with smartphones. And even if we were in a lockdown, we could create films in our home environment. And so I think there's also something about creativity can give us, an opportunity to get through difficult times if you're, making up work. And that's sort of what smartphone filmmaking probably can do, even while the whole industry stopped. Cannes Festival starts at the moment, and then Cannes, there's a film being presented which was produced during the time in LA in lockdown. And so I think there's some being very taking the positive things and being creative, I think, can get us through difficult times. So yeah, I think it's not it would have been very nicer to meet you. It was a really fantastic conference when I came. It was very open, it was welcome. It was only my second time in Indonesia, and so I learned a lot in that time, and so it's really fantastic. Today I want to talk to you and do the screen sharing trick again. I should know it now. Let me kick off my PowerPoint first. And it was really great to see the earlier keynotes yesterday. Just do a share screen. Just a quick check. You can see that fine now? is yeah, some great keynotes yesterday, and I try to draw in 2 or 3 lines from them as well. But I'm really talking about something that I'm really passionate about today, which is smartphone filmmaking. Just because there's many of you in the audience, you know, it's as simple as, you know, getting your phone out, pressing the camera button, and then, you know, you swipe to video and you press the record button, and welcome to the community of smartphone filmmaking. That is one side of smartphone filmmaking, but we also now have Hollywood blockbusters that are produced in, you know, $2 million budgets. If you think about Unsane from Steven Soderbergh, if you've got $2 budgets, you can be part in this community too. So I really would like to start with the acknowledgement of country. As I'm joining you from Melbourne, Australia. We respectfully acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land on which Swinburne's Australian campuses are located in Melbourne's east and outer east. We pay our respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'm joining you virtually from these lands. We are honored to recognize our connection to Wurundjeri country, history, culture, and spirituality through these locations, and strive to ensure that we operate in a manner that respects and honors the elders, ancestors of these lands. We also respectfully acknowledge Swinburne's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff, students, alumni, partners, and visitors. We also acknowledge and respect the traditional owners of the land across Australia, their elders, ancestors, cultures, and heritage, and recognize the continuing sovereignty of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations. And yeah, on Twitter, I'm Max Mobile, and I've been into this for like quite some time now. So in 2007, I uploaded my first, I'd like to call them micro movies at that time, experiments to YouTube, and ever since then, have been really into smartphone filmmaking. And just to show you some pictures on the slide, so I'm hiding there behind the N6680. Some of you might remember that Nokia phone, which had a fantastic camera, and most people don't realize it even had the functionality to video edit. But of course, Nokia, being Nokia, they tried to do everything, and they didn't understand that, I guess, the smartphone world was operating in a slightly different environment. And so Apple came and they introduced the Apple Store, and now we've got lots of apps on phones. And so I don't know if anyone is in the audience that has a Nokia phone, but please put your hand up. I would make a bet there is probably no one anymore. And that is really interesting to see how quick this space can move on. And of course, the iPhone 4 was, I think, where lots of, in the chat, is there someone with a Nokia phone? No, sorry. I was just really surprised. That would have been great. The iPhone 4, lots of people talk about, because that introduced 1080p. For like, that's where lots of journalists became interested in smartphone filmmaking, because it had the video production capability. But for me, the iPhone 4 was actually quite interesting because you could start to edit at that time already in 2013. So you see on the right an experimental film which is called Midtown. And sometimes I see some people that are on YouTube now, they say, "Oh, I've just edited a video on my iPad. This is so innovative." And I'm like, yeah, awesome that you've made it. That's really great. And but it's been around for some time. And sometimes when we think about the big festivals, like, Soderbergh is being celebrated as, the guy who invented smartphone filmmaking, or like, we had last year at Cannes Film Festival, a smartphone film, and we had a few at the Berlinale. But I'm trying to make a point. There's a community of creatives that have been doing this work for around 10 years. And so as a filmmaker, but also as an academic, I position myself really as part of this community, and really would like to talk about, what happened in the space of smartphone filmmaking, and also how can we really study this now. And that is how I would like to talk about the book. It's out very soon, Smartphone Filmmaking Theory and Practice. And I also, I do experimental films. So some of the films are more for the gallery context. I've produced some broadcasting documentaries as well. But I also increasingly work with communities. So in the middle, you can see a picture, which probably the best location I've ever been to is the Rarotonga, the Cook Islands. Just because it's a small island, you can drive around in 20 minutes, and people are so friendly and so welcoming. And as we were driving around the island, we got to meet the ministers, because everyone knew about us. So it was a really, really special place. And we got to make a project for the biggest NGO, which is the National Council for Women, about the emerging leaders in governance and politics, which are young Cook Islanders, young Rarotongans. And we really tried to co-create this film with them. We had only 2 weeks on location. I went there with some students at that time when I was living in New Zealand. And it's really fantastic to see how the work we could produce in collaboration with the community. And then I've been producing a few transmedia projects in the last year. There was one project, Nucleus, which I mentioned when I was in Jakarta. That's now been completed. And it was really great to see. So I mentioned this later on in the talk. And yeah, I was really interested in thinking about smartphones as being, at that time, and in the early explorations, there was, back in 2007, you were only supposed to take pictures, maybe short videos, but not make feature films with a smartphone. That was sort of my ideas, like, well, you can actually do it. And I think that's something we saw in the panel before. You can do a lot more with what, game engines are not just for game designers and developers. And, a certain way that people think about AR and VR is not only about what some companies are doing with it. There's lots more room for exploration. I think that really happens through creative investigations. And Mina, it went through a few name changes over the last years, just because it's been moving around and growing. And the Mobile Innovation Network and Association. So you might be saying, what kind of a strange domain name is that .pro? But that is really, when we started it 11 years ago, we were like, we are mobile phone filmmakers, we are professionals, let's choose .pro as a domain name. And it's fantastic to see that it's still ongoing, and we present the screening in different countries. So being truly mobile, it was for 4 years in Aotearoa, New Zealand, then moved to Australia, mainly in Melbourne, working there with ACME, RMIT, and ACME, the Australian Centre for Moving Image. And now we're working very closely with University of Nottingham, Ningbo in China. And as an Adobe education leader, it's really great because Adobe has an app policy, sort of, that say that they also go like app first. And I think it's really showing what smartphones are doing in the sort of contribution to creativity. And Mina is really about getting people together. So we've got a film screening, which is we've got a new Voices program, which is emerging smartphone filmmakers, and then we've got a program of about normally 90 minutes or an hour to 90 minutes of international short films. And there's some filmmakers that have been submitting films over the last years quite regularly. Through the Nucleus project, we were really inspired to do more work with ecology. So we've got an eco smartphone film program this year. And we also had, being part of COVID, we had a lockdown category. So we have films from all around the world that filmmakers created in lockdown. There were some really great submissions coming through. I'm just in the process of creating this screening program. We will present it in November. And you can see there in the picture a photo from the event at ACME, the Australian Centre for Moving Image. And the idea is really, we bring people together to talk about what is happening in the world of smartphone filmmaking. Some smartphone filmmakers are in the audience, of course, and some audience members might be inspired to make new smartphone films and submit this next year to Mina. And I think that's really the vision and the drive that we see for Mina. Yesterday in the panel discussion from the great Keynote by May, she mentioned that cinema screenings can be also outside, and that's something that we really try to explore with Mina on a few times as well, so that most of our films are experimental, so they work very well on public screens, such as you can see there in Federation Square in Melbourne. Or we're working now with a company which is called Urban Screen TV. Sorry, it's a quick zip. Which has a network of public screens globally. Just very much because the idea, when you encounter a screen in the public space, a narrative might take some time to unfold, but experimental works are way more immersive and you can engage at any point in time. Or another screening which we organized in New Zealand and Aotearoa, Wellington, on the Cuba Street, which is a place to be in Wellington on a Friday night, we put a projector on the top of a car and screened the films. And that was probably the biggest interaction I've seen of MENA films, because everyone stopped by, and everyone who was in Wellington on a Friday night stopped by and had a chat with us, and like, you know, people came back and, you know, hang around, and it was just, yeah, it was just really fantastic to have this sort of a encounter in the public space. And so MENA is about experimentation. I think thinking about what is happening in the world of you know, AR and VR, so it's like, you know, more opportunities how we can get smartphone films out and about now. The other thing that is really key for MENA is that we try to, yeah, really engage audiences. And I can see MENA really as a link or as a connecting between the creative industries and communities. And I've been doing some great work with some colleagues at Swinburne University and media and communication with Diana and Anthony and a colleague in the Social Innovation Institute, Hillary, where we had a grant by Telstra, a telecommunication company in Australia, and we worked with city councils, Knox Council and Bondara Council, to create some workshops for senior citizens. There's a digital inclusion index in Australia that found that senior citizens are the most digitally disconnected of all of Australians. And so we thought this is a wicked problem that we have to challenge through digital storytelling workshops. So we use iPads because they're a bit bigger, but it's really fantastic to see how senior citizens really opened up story worlds immediately. In New Zealand, I've done quite a few workshops with Pacific and Maori youth. And the picture in the middle, as you can see, at the St Kilda Film Festival, which is Australia's longest running short film festival. And of course, it has a fantastic audience as it is full of independent filmmakers. And so it was a really critical audience, but also really challenging in a good way, because there were lots of questions came up. So Max, what do we do with audio? And, you know, well, there's connectors, so you can connect all the XLR microphones that you have. And we're talking about lots of really high-end post-production side of things. So, you know, which is color codecs and all these sort of things. And I think the great thing about smartphone filmmaking, it cuts across from, you know, making a short video that you put on Instagram or TikTok these days to a feature film. This is the whole world of smartphone filmmaking. And of course, there is, like Gus mentioned it in the meeting before, some very accessible ways for VR. So if there's a Google Cardboard, all you need is your smartphone and you can have a VR experience. And the Nucleus project was really fantastic to really think about what does ecology mean? How do we understand ecology, and what is this challenge to people around the world? Well, if we use smartphone filmmaking, we can capture what it means. And so the Goethe Institute is a German cultural organizations. They funded to invite 9 filmmakers from 8 different countries of the Australasian region to come to Wellington. And we had a workshop there. And, you know, things like climate change, they mean so many different things to so many different people, but through smartphone filmmaking, we can really capture this. And this is just a snapshot of the films that you see at MENA, which is really exciting. You know, there's normally a trip around the world, and you get a film from every continent. I'm not sure if you count Antarctica normally, but there's been a smartphone film produced by National Geographic about Antarctica. So, you know, maybe we could get that for the future. But, you know, just to give you an example, there's a documentary about the health crisis in Tanzania, which was made by medical students. And of course, you get very different insight into the medical system if medical students filming that than if you get a film crew that arrives somewhere from abroad, comes up with a big camera and starts filming in a hospital, right? So there's lots of ideas and storytelling that can resonate. There's also lots of the camera technology is changing, so there's lots of aesthetic ideas that are changing. But one of the things that I really try to emphasize is it's quite important for smartphone filmmaking to study some of the early ideas. Of course, not every film would be a great smartphone film, but if you're working with communities, if you're working about self-reflective ideas, if you're working about personal storytelling, the smartphone could be a camera of choice. And so some of these films, yes, you find online, but for MENA, we really put some effort, and I have to do a big shout out here to Adrian, who's a colleague, who's also a smartphone filmmaker, who's designing a program every year for MENA. And in the past, I've been working with some other colleagues at AUT University or RMIT University. We put lots of effort into designing the program. So we don't like give out like awards, you know, something that you can put in your shelf. I'm not sure if that's the thing. I think the idea is more being part of that community, and your name, your film will be part of a great program that positions you among all these other smartphone filmmakers. And then we try to create the MENA program. At the moment, it's available through the ATOM, with the Australian Teacher of Media Education shop, so that you can have a 1-hour screening program, ready there. You don't need to go online to find all these different films. All the trailers are also on the MENA website, which is a really great overview of the last 10 years. So we wanted to make a big party for MENA 10. It's really exciting, but then of course, we can't know what we can plan, because Australia is very much also still in the borders are closed. So I don't think there's any traveling in November. It means you can't really invite people. So we'll also do something online. But yeah, it's just really fantastic to see that it's, going still, and every year we receive more and more submissions. So it's lots of work, but it's really exciting. In the past, I've been working with a colleague from RMIT University, Marsha Berry, and we sort of looked out into the world of more broadly, some of the opportunities for mobile media. And I think this very much happened that after I finished my PhD, I sort of thought, okay, now I want to do all these things that focus outside the documentary approach, and I really want to get into this domain. And so mobile media making in the age of smartphones explores aesthetics, space and place, knowledge, stories, and so on. There's 2 edited collections, and the idea was really to bring different practitioners together that use mobile media in innovative ways, that focuses on creative practices, digital ethnographies, can't even say the word, new visualities and socialities. And then mobile story making in the age of smartphone further developed this discourse and continue to define creative mobile media. So it's one of my favorite quotes is story making to contribute to formulating democratic processes and equity, which are imperative to create and change and challenge traditional models of media production and consumption. So we are embracing creating, collaboration, and curation, which is sort of the idea of story making, not only storytelling. And it focused on story making, making spaces, and making change. And at the moment, I'm working with a colleague, Xiaogu Xu from China, on the 3rd edition, which is Mobile Story in Age of Smartphones. And it's a really transdisciplinary project which looks into new storytelling, vulnerable communities and social innovation, mobile creative arts, and mobile education and translation. So, which of course is, being in China, it was really good for me to have my smartphone that I can do a live AR project that I know, what it says when I'm on the train station to get on the right train. And, if I've got a question, I can just speak to my phone and it says it out in Chinese. And so for storytellers, that can also be a great opportunity that we can now make films, and the language doesn't have to be English. It's not that important anymore because we can have live translations. And so that's also where I think mobile media can make a contribution to wider fields. And so again, it's very much driven by a community element that is demonstrating a social and creative innovation. Today, I really want to talk to you about smartphone filmmaking theory and practice, because it's a book that I've been working on for a long time. And I really wanted to bring together what I've been working on for the last 10 years. And, there's on the MENA website, there's the screening programs. I've been in discussions with lots of filmmakers, and I noticed that there isn't really one book that focuses on the creative arts element of smartphone filmmaking. And so there have been a few publications over the last years that deal with mobile media, smartphone filmmaking, such as mainly focusing on the short films or documentaries, which was my PhD, the mobile mentary. There's a great book which is Cell Films, which is more about visual activism, which is by McEntee, Burkholder, and Schwab, that came out in 2016. Sorry, Schwab Carters. There's Mobile Cinema by Atkinson in 2017. There's Mobile Filmmaking by Berry in 2017. But they all sort of looked into different aspects, but not really the creative process of what is happening in the smartphone filmmaking world, which means for me, production, distribution, exhibition. And yeah, so for me, there's sort of, maybe let me read it out to you. Why not every story might be appropriate to be realized with a mobile device or smartphone if working with communities, capturing locations, or working in the domain of personal and first-person filmmaking the smartphone or mobile device should be considered as a camera of choice. The mobile specificity is expressed through accessibility, mobility, and its intimate and immediate qualities. These smartphone filmmaking specific characteristics and personal forms of crafting experiences contribute to a formulation of new storytelling approaches. Stylistic developments of vertical video and collaborative processes in smartphone filmmaking are evolving into hybrid formats that resonate in other film forms. And I want to be in this keynote even bolder and say that now smartphone filmmaking is influencing filmmaking more generally. So very much in a way that you could see at the moment there's a first feature film being produced that is entirely vertical. The way that handheld came from the short film independent areas and then became part of the main discourse in filmmaking, we can see that lots of innovations are coming now out of smartphone filmmaking. I'll talk a bit more about vertical, but there was a great presentation 2 years ago about vertical cinema as well at IMOVICCON. So which you can see, there's also, this is happening internationally. It's not just a thing that happens, in one part of the world. You can see smartphone filmmaking, in every continent. And so I talk, through that. I noticed there's practitioners, there's an industry, so there's companies that produce apps. There is there's a business around it, so it's an economic reality if you want to. And there's some very particular festivals that deal with smartphone filmmaking. One thing I think though is that we need to really go back also to mobile filmmaking to understand what smartphone filmmaking does now in a very good way, is to think about what did the early mobile films do. Because if you see some of the very specific characteristics of the mobile phone films, which is this immediacy and the intimate nature that they could express storytelling, that still resonates in contemporary smartphone films. So if you look at Unsane, it's a bit of an unstable story, right? About the psychiatry, and you can't get out of the psychiatry anymore. And, well, it's a narrative film. If you look at one of the earliest mobile phone films from Iran Kaganov from South Africa, SMS Sugarman, it was filmed with a very different device, but it had similar qualities in terms of the intimacy and immediate nature. There's Maxus Kaitai, which was part of my PhD film, which at that time I think went to different festivals as well, and it really sort of started to explore how can we use these aesthetics and make them what looks very different on a mobile phone as a pixelated device. How can we use this in a very special way and think about very personal storytelling? And then, yeah, as you can see in the picture, working with some sort of different approaches to editing, or the film is called Max with a Kaitai, Max with a mobile phone. It's also a direct reference to Giga Vertov's The Man with a Movie Camera. So thinking about how we can push forward interval editing and thinking about spatial compositions. There's been some more other early films which really are situated in this in this domain. So there's Mark Americas, which is a picture there, which is sort of like also another art house film, and on the top right, the picture is Moscow Diaries by Adam Kozov, which is an exploration of Walter Benjamin's diaries in contemporary Moscow through Walter Benjamin's writing in the 1920s. And so I think that is again showing us how we can really fuse time and space in really innovative ways through smartphone filmmaking. One of the earliest festivals, if you look at the picture on the bottom right between all the phones, yes, that's me. Was at the Pocket Film Festival in France in 2005. They started, I think, 1 or 2 years before, and I mean, it was fantastic. There is a Les Halles, which is like the BFI in London, or the Acme. It's a cinema. 440 people, sold out. A festival over 3 days, and everyone is into smartphone filmmaking. There's some very prominent French filmmakers that presented their mobile phone films there, and so of course France has a tradition of cinema verite, filming in the streets, and developing a film languages. And also France is very well supported by their government to produce French-speaking films. And so it was really great to have some conversations with Richard Dijandi, Jean-Luc Taki, or Alain Fleischer, who, for instance, runs a film school, and so for him it was very clear that there is traditional filmmaking, there's a new thing that is emerging, which is mobile phone filmmaking. And so it was really fantastic to present my at that time, my PhD film, my feature film, at that level of that public engagement. And I think it doesn't have to be always that way, but I think mobile phone filmmaking was at that level early on, so 2005. And if you look at the festivals now, we can see that there's lots of work emerging internationally. And I think it's really exciting also for Africa or Asia to think about supporting a localized version of what filmmaking and storytelling means, because we can do this with limited access to resources, and this can happen for short films as well as feature films. So you can see here I did a bit of a map in 2012. These are like the smartphone film festivals internationally, and if we compare this with 2018, I did a bit of color coding. So blue means that the festival has been running for, at that time, 8 years. So that's, in 2018, orange is 5 to 7 years, green is 2 to 4 years, and yellow 1 year. And I just had a quick look on some of these submission portals. So like such as Film Freeway, there's now 32 film festivals that focus on smartphone filmmaking internationally. And I think, some of these festivals come up and disappear. Some other ones are continuing now, but we can see now quite a few that have made it past the 5 or 8 year mark. And that is really, I think, fantastic to see. They're also quite different from the early film festivals that had in the 2010 mark, we had a few festivals, big festivals that had like one category for mobile phone filmmaking. But they were mainly festivals that were disseminating or were showing in a very traditional model standard, short and feature films, and had like a little bit on mobile phone filmmaking. Now it's very different. These festivals are created by smartphone filmmakers, by cinephiles, by creators that are passionate about smartphone filmmaking, and they only show smartphone filmmaking. So it's a very different game being, somewhere on the sides, there's a little panel on smartphone filmmaking to be right in the spotlight. And so this is an overview of which really shaped the book when I started to look into this of the last 10 screening programs. And in terms of the research, I was thinking a bit about the aspect of curation. There's a text that I came across, which I think is really useful, which is Rethinking Curation by Graham and Cook. And they point out that artists might be best placed to create emergent media, so this discourse of new media art, emerging arts, because they have worked with it and they know most about it. And furthermore, they also say that new media art is very much like contemporary arts, but it also has particular characteristics that distinguish it from contemporary art and the extension from the systems involved in production, exhibition, interpretation, dissemination of contemporary art. And so I think that is very similar to smartphone filmmaking. It operates very much like filmmaking with production, distribution, exhibition, but it's also very focused in a very different way in the world of smartphone, or even if we extend the history into mobile filmmaking. So there's similarities, but some very particular differences. And that, I think, is very similar when you then have a smartphone filmmaker curating the smartphone filmmaking program. You can maybe focus, or you will focus, on some of the more innovative elements. So one of the quotes from the book is, fundamentally challenge the notion of authorship, and the network model of new media is not the broadcast model of the one-to-many, but the many-to-many approach of peer-to-peer networking. The roles of artist and audience and participating are blurring. The participants sometimes are the audience, and an audience of peers is excellent for pushing the expertise of a critical level in the field. And so one thing that I've found is, if any one of you is, I know there's a few students in the Zoom world, and there's quite a few educators in the Zoom world. If any one of you is teaching documentary or filmmaking or nonfiction, I'm sure you will use Bill Nichols' text, The Introduction Documentary, where he talks about different documentary modes. And how can we understand the world if there's 11 film festivals only for me? There's 32 film festivals of smartphone filmmaking, and we still say one smartphone film is the same for everything. And I think that doesn't work anymore. We've come now so much critical mass, and we've got so much contextual practice that we can really push the boundaries across us and think about some very particular categories for smartphone filmmaking. And I mean, that's what we do in all other disciplines, right? In design, we only talk about a piece of design through another piece of design. We talk about a feature film through another feature film within a particular genre. And That didn't happen in smartphone filmmaking for a long time, which is really critical and which is really problematic. If we compare a smartphone film to another feature film, it is a very different mode of production. It's a very different resource. It's very different executed. And smartphone filmmaking theory and practice is really trying to focus for the first time to put an emphasis on smartphone filmmaking and compare smartphone filmmaking within that realm of creative practice that is emerging. So Bill Nichols starts with the expository, poetic, observational, interactive, participatory, reflexive, and performative modes. And then most recently in the world of interactive documentaries, iDocs, Aston, Gaudenzi, and Rose developed a similar idea where they created the conventional mode, the hypertext mode, the participative mode, and the experimental mode. And that has been, I think, very well cited. Like Nichols, if you go to a documentary studies conference like Visible Evidence, he'll be cited, in every conference. And it is still a key text that, we use as an introduction, use it as a starting point to talk about what is happening in the world of documentary, and then you can, push it further. And the same now for interactive documentaries. And of course, Nichols and Aston, Gaudenzi, and Rose are very aware that these categories are not perfect. They're not meant to be perfect. It's just a starting point, and of course there's sometimes a mix and match between these categories, but it provides for us an overview that we can understand what is happening in the world of documentary, nonfiction, or interactive documentaries, or now what I propose is the idea of smartphone filmmaking. So I sort of use these modes, and I'm very much influenced by these modes, and I've termed the poetic and experimental mode, the participatory and engagement mode, the smartphone native mode, the conversational mode, and then one which is called the red carpet in your pocket mode, which is narrative films. And so what I will do now in the next 10 minutes is I will look first into the MENA films that screened at MENA, and sort of just give you some examples of what these modes are. And then I will look into the broader world of smartphone filmmaking internationally and, pinpoint at some of these modes again. If you get the book in September, we can do the defined reading on the particular modes. But I don't want to spend too much detail now on each of these modes because, there's 10 minutes left. So let's start with the poetic and experimental mode, and just, that's probably the one that I'm most excited about, because very much I think smartphone filmmaking facilitates experimentation. And you can shoot at any point, you can shoot at any time. But just to give you some examples here, there's on the bottom right, which would be a big city, which was actually filmed through a microscope and then using street sounds. And on the bottom left, there is some dark waves, which you can take your phone now also to the ocean. And there's this, which happened in the last years in MENA, there's sort of underwater mobile smartphone cinematography emerging. Or in the center, you can see a picture by Anders Weberg, which is a Swedish film artist. And maybe to point a bit back to the keynote from Ben, sorry, who was talking a bit about Back to the Future and what happened with different film forms re-emerging, and so he talked about dogma, and I think I can sort of see that link in the experimental and that poetic and experimental mode, which is about not only the technical capabilities but exploring the aesthetics, the new audiovisual forms and storytelling. So, and when we look into the history of filmmaking, we can see this from the French New Wave, which influenced dogma filmmaking, but then the French New Wave was influenced by the Giga Vertov, the French New Wave as part of the Giga Vertov group, who were influenced by the Soviet filmmakers. And, so there's different alternative approaches that are, keep resurfacing. And I think smartphone filmmaking can really dark waves, ride that wave or push that wave further. The participatory and engagement mode, we can see a picture on the top left, which is from Anna Massoni, who is a photographer, filmmaker. She's now the director of the Photography Museum in New York, and Center for Photography in New York. And back in 2007, she started to take a selfie. I mean, selfie became a critical discourse from 2013 onwards, when it was the word of the year, but she sort of takes us into this world of, we don't really know who these four characters are, but they sort of construct, a world that we become part of. The smartphone native mode is for me an idea that we work with native video. When you talk about online video, is a video that is just living online. And so these films have been filmed and edited and uploaded from a smartphone, so that there's no more desktop engagement. And I think that is very different if you're actually editing on location rather than sending the files back to an editing lab, and there's a different person editing these files in a dark room. Well, when you're still on location, you're immersed by what happened in that environment. And so you can see a couple of different films in Word Mina, which is Days at Armageddon Beach, Pacific Colors, Dreaming, or Five Calls. And that is, you can see from 2011 to 2017. Different ideas, so like, the film Five Calls, even the script writing was done by text messaging. So some really creative explorations. Then there's a conversational mode, which I think it's very much thinking about this bottom-up approach and the horizontal approach that enables the maker to start a conversation about something that they're passionate about. For instance, Two Stories, which is a film from a refugee from Syria, or Tofu Man, which is a story about immigration. And we can sort of really understand, if we see these films, what does it feel to have, lived in Syria for some time and now continue living in the Western world, or what does it mean to be an immigrant in Australia? Through these works, we can start a conversation on these really important topics. And then there's a red carpet in the pocket mode, which is the narrative films. Of course, lots of people love narrative cinema, but there's some really, I think, interesting ideas now how we almost remediate what cinema does. And that's sort of the red carpet in your pocket, which is this one film on the right, which is a feature film from 2006, got in my pocket, Life and Death of an iPhone, which goes through the life cycle of iPhone from, a factory to, someone in New York who then, the iPhone gets stolen and then it, is being repaired through the point of view of an iPhone. Or like Bubbles Don't Lie, which has these sort of speech bubbles, these bubbles coming up. It's a really funny film, which is almost like a predecessor of like what AR could do in some ways. And the thing, I think, especially for narrative films, so the mode of the red carpet in your pocket is that you can do, like you can see two screenshots here from Bubbles, from the Life and Death of an iPhone and Bubbles Don't Lie, which is you can do a very traditional approach where you have, a camera person, a lighting person, a sound person, you move as a crew, or, it can be just one person doing the sort of selfie mode. This is both possible, and there is no saying which is right or wrong. It's just like about how you use the creative strategy for your projects. The book focuses on the film festivals that are there in the world of smartphone filmmaking. And so I interviewed Susie Botello from the International Mobile Film Festival. There's MOMO, the Mobile Motion Festival in Switzerland, Zurich, SF3, which is Smartphone Flick Fest in Australia, and the African International Smartphone Film Festival, which is directed by Michael Osheke. And there's also Karl Bardosch, who's a keynote for Next Mina, who's been in the world of mobile phone filmmaking for a long time, who started a film festival in India quite some time ago. And he also brings mobile phone filmmaking to Cannes, which I think is like, a great way. The key thing to notice here is that, for instance, MOMO, the Mobile Motion Festival, which is directed by Andreas Holle and Simon Horrocks. So Sai is also a filmmaker, a smartphone filmmaker himself. That's what I tried to mention before, is that there is, lots of a community now that is very passionate on smartphone filmmaking. There is then some filmmakers that I interviewed, which is Gerda Semmer, Filippo Cardona, Camille Baker, and Konrad Mess. And Konrad Mess is very well known for narrative films. He has won more than, I think, 80 awards at that time when I was writing the book. Camille Baker, who's working more with some interactive and immersive media. Filippo Cardona from Colombia, who works a lot with some net filmmaking, and Gerda Semmer, who's an experimental filmmaker. And then also I looked into the industry. So there's Luma Touch, which is an editing functionality for your Luma Fusion by Luma Touch. I interviewed Terry Morgan, who is a co-founder and principal designer, and it's a really fantastic editing app that gives you all the things that you would expect from a desktop editing app. There's Benoit Laboudret, who's a film festival director from the Pocket Film Festival, a filmmaker, an educator, and a consultant, who has been passionate about the space for a long time. There's an interview with Adobe, who produces Adobe Rush, which is a fantastic way that you can start working on your projects, editing on a mobile phone, and then send it to your desktop computer through the Creative Cloud. There's an interview with Jason van Genderen from Treehouse, who also covers the whole spectrum of making commercials to storytelling, all on mobile devices. And Struman Optics, it's an Australian company that develops these sort of accessoires. Just very briefly, I mentioned there's sort of underwater cinematography. There's also mobile music, which I talk a little bit about, so that it is the entire creative process, so to say. And then I went back and looked into the world of smartphone filmmaking internationally and identified some other films again for poetic and experimental mode. And so here we've got most prominently the film which is won the Night Fishing, which won the Berlinale for the best short film by the Korean brothers. Apologies for mispronunciation. Park Chan-wook and Park Chan-kong. But also, like, I think some really great works by Bali or Our Humanity, which are from the Sensory Ethnography Lab at Harvard University, and others as well. Then there's a few feature films that have been produced. And we had a great presentation from Blue Moon from Steph Harris last year at MENA, which has been disseminated now quite widely. Has been doing very well at also international film festival circuits. And the conversational mode. Just really wanted to highlight very briefly some films that played at the Berlinale. So they received major film festival funding and by broadcasters, so Selfie, Midnight Traveler, or Saudi Runaway. And I think, yeah, very clever films that could not have been produced with a traditional camera. Selfie uses the perspective of two teenagers filming their neighborhood in Italy, and they use us through the selfie mode. So it's very different when you watch it in a cinema. Of course, it's the whole selfie aesthetic, but after 10 minutes, you feel like the best friend of these two guys. Saudi Runaway was co-created with a young woman fleeing her forced marriage in Arabia and Saudi Arabia, and so it's crafted in a very engaging way, because it's a story that is almost like communicated only to us through a sort of chat message in a way. Or then Midnight Runner, which takes you on a family escaping from Syria to Europe. And again, the phone is always on us, so it's very engaging, and and it's also like showing you what these people go through. Just very briefly, in conversational mode, there's a few films that have been doing now really well on social media, such as Eva Stories, for instance, or there's Sick House on Snapchat, or Throwback 89 on Instagram, and also some other broadcasting projects. This is a project, Nucleus, that we worked on with the Goethe Institute. It was really fantastic to see how smartphone filmmaking can really connect people. And then this is a project that I presented 2 years ago, Tales from Yambik Shire. And just to sort of as a closing the loop, so to say, what I ended up doing is I edited one version for the community, and then one version that went to festivals. It was a finalist at the St. Kilda Film Festival and was screened at the New York Cell Phone Film Festival. So, which made the regional communities really proud to be, on the big cinema screen. But there's more and more things happening in the world of, smartphone filmmaking. We had a great paper at IME, International Mobile Moving Image Cultures Conference, about vertical videos 2 years ago. And there's now feature films being made in Russia that are vertical. So I think there's more in the space that we will see. And just really want to end now with thinking about the new opportunities that there are in that world of, network media, thinking about new practices, which the last panel very much explored, that we can shift to think about is one of the possible futures of smartphone filmmaking, engaging with AR and VR, but also things like blockchain distribution, for instance. So there's in Russia 2 feature films that have been, they are mobile feature films that have been disseminated through a blockchain technology. Thank you, and Terry Makashi.
Thank you, Max. That was really wonderful. I'm really glad to hear more of your, work on mobile filmmaking. I remember 2 years ago talking to you about your work in mobile filmmaking. So really great to hear even more, from 2 years ago. So I know that we have a little bit of, this session is supposed to end at 10, I'm in Los Angeles time, so I'm still trying to think. So it's 11:30 a.m. Jakarta time is when the session is supposed to end. So I don't know, to the committee, do we have just a little bit more time for Q&A? Maybe just like 5-10 minutes more? Okay, great. Yeah, so let me just open this up before I just open the conversation, before I open it to the audience. I'm really interested in this whole, the smartphone filmmaking, and I think it's such a innovative and such a creative and really transformative, form of filmmaking. It's the work that you do is so community-based, very collaborative, and I really like that emphasis that you do in your work, which is collaborative, community-based, and very much, trying to be inclusive with the community that you work with. I'm going to take a step back a little bit and just ask to pick your brains a little bit, which has to do with, the history of filmmaking itself, which I know in your paper, which I read, which is about, the history of filmmaking has a lot of innovations, right, along the way, which is, we have a series of innovations like 16mm filmmaking, and you also have and then after that you have things like the Sony Portapack, and then you have video cam, handy cams, making filmmaking and video making so much more accessible to the general public, right? Not only cheaper, but also more mobile, more, it's lighter, easier to carry, right? So I wanted to ask you and just pick your brains, like what is unique and different about mobile and smartphone filmmaking? In relation to the wider, history of filmmaking, which also has to do with, making filmmaking more accessible and also lighter and more mobile for the wider public.
It's a fantastic question. Thank you. And I still need to think about how many minutes I've got to answer. But I think there's almost different answers that I could give to this question. I think one thing that you've identified is these sort of waves where independent filmmaking really innovated what happened in storytelling. And I think the smartphone filmmaking is extending that very much. And we can also see that you can use some of these strategies and really realize them very well with the smartphone. The thing that, of course, ever since the first mobile phones came out, which was, I think, the first mobile camera phone was J-phone in Japan, 2000, is that, yeah, you can have these phones on you all the time, so, and you don't have a big camera on you all the time. And when people ask me, when I do workshops, people always tell me, Max, what is the best smartphone to use? And I say the one that you've got in your pocket, right? Because if you see something that you want to explore visually, you can take it out of your pocket and start filming. I mean, of course, there's a different thing to then crafting a project around this, but having the availability to continue the experimentation and continue to refine your practice with a smartphone, I think is very, very fantastic. Of course, there's like some accessoires that you can use, like that professional filmmakers might use. But you can also, like, for instance, a tripod. But even if you don't have access to a tripod, you can build one yourself. We did this like during lockdown. I don't know if we have it still here, but we've got this sort of idea of like, a toilet paper roll, and you put two sides and you can put a tripod, and that can make a steady camera, So there's lots of these days, lots of accessoires. I think, with having if you don't have access to a microphone, what we all use in the conference, I've seen everyone using it, you've got the headphones that can act as a microphone. So there's like some ways that you can even facilitate professional practice if you don't have access to professional gear. The other thing, of course, which is very different from a 60mm camera, is that which was also very mobile. It had sync sound, it was handheld, but it didn't connect to the internet, right? So nowadays, I think we've got this whole production studio really on our smartphones, which means that you can film, you can even edit with Adobe Rush or LumaFusion, and then you can upload this to the internet, G4, maybe soon G5 network. And that, I think, is really like a way that you can think about production, distribution, exhibition as one part of filmmaking that now can all be happening in the mobile world. For storytelling, I think there's, of course, some really great avenues to think about personal filmmaking, to think about self-reflective filmmaking, where we can see, like I tried to say, for instance, with these films that were at the Berlinale, these films could not have been produced with a standard digital video camera, because you can put the camera in a selfie mode, but you wouldn't be walking around with a camera all the time, and that would produce a very different perception of you. But if you are just somewhere with your phone, it's just a guy with a phone and not a filmmaker. And so if you think about this as a creative strategy, you can use this in some very interesting ways. At the same time, I think for me, experimentation is always really great. So that, when people say, oh, you can't really film like a low light capacity with a phone, my answer is no. You use a Filmic Pro and you understand that you can use your ISO in a very low scale. So anything to keep your ISO under 100, 115, you have no grain in your image. You just need to introduce more lighting to the scene. So that means you can do some fantastic experimental photography. You can change the shutter speed. And so it is about thinking about, what is your project about, and then developing a strategy, a creative strategy that really suits your creative filmmaking style. But I could go on talking about this, but I just cut it short for the time's sake. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat box. So let me start with the first one. It's from Ibu Ima Rianto. I don't know if Ibu Ina, if you want to pose the question to Max verbally, or should I read it?
I will ask directly.
Okay, thank you.
Questions like this or conflicts like this often happens, and it's still going on. I often meet some people, especially the older generation, asking about give negative credits to mobile filmmaking, and they value it less than traditional filmmaking. As far as you explained, as far as I understand that each of them has different rules. I mean, somehow there are many advantages on the mobile phone that cannot be provided by the traditional film with big cameras, right? So they have their own ways, and I'm thinking that they might get along well together, or will mobile phone replace it, traditional filmmaking sometime in the future? It's kind of a big question, though.
It's a really good question. Thank you. If you notice the industry, the red camera manufacturer introduced the red hydrogen, which is a smartphone. Arri Lexa, which is like very well known for Arri Lexa cameras. That is like the standard. They have now the Arri Lexa Mini, which is a small scale camera. It's also very mobile. Of course, you put lots of things on, you put lens, and it becomes a bit bigger, but it's also smaller. Similar like to Blackmagic, they also have a pocket camera. And so I think what we can see is that the industry, or like the general filmmaking world, is sort of moving to the space of more smaller portable cameras, because you can go places, you can do things, you can just, navigate sets, crews quicker. And then, of course, there's the world of smartphone filmmaking, where we can see now that, Sean Baker made Tangerine. It's a fantastic film that made all the independent film festivals. Steven Soderbergh, if you look, the interesting thing about the smartphone films that are produced on a very high budget, they've got a big crew, they've got 10 people, 15 people in the audio crew, 4 or 5 editors, which is not like what you just do when you pick up your phone. But the interesting thing, even in the world of this, is that most directors are now becoming cinematographers. And so I think that is one change, that Steven Soderbergh, Sean Baker, Jean-Claude, the French name, there was screened at Cannes 2 years ago, a smartphone film. They all are cinematographers, directors. And we had in filmmaking for some time the writer-director, especially in smaller countries, where people write their films and then go and make their films, but they had a cinematographer. And now what we can see is that directors controlling the camera themselves, because they want that immediate action. They want to sort of take control of this. And the smartphone is, in a way, maybe a bit more accessible, a bit more easier to work. So we can see some change in the filmmaking industry already. And I think it won't be that it's completely overtaken. I think it will be just like one of these things that we can see, so that you have, I think the independent smartphone film festivals are really fantastic. And there's lots of film festival organizers. They put so much effort, all their heart into it. And it's not really like a big business model for them, because it's a smartphone filmmaking, but they build the community really through a bottom-up approach. And so I think, rather saying that it will overtake, I think it's more like we can see now there is also that world of smartphone filmmaking being around now. And we can see some things like the film breaker movement. There's a few people that have created the vertical video manifesto. And so it's, it's sort of becoming one space in the world of filmmaking.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
More confidence in doing and answering questions, similar questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Buina. Thank you, Max. So we have a second question here from Hakim Irsiad. Again, Hakim, I'll just ask, do you want to ask this question to Max yourself verbally, or do you want me to ask for you? I'll read it out loud. If you want to ask it yourself, please feel free to turn on your mic. Hakim. Okay, so let me ask, so I'll read it to you, Max. So hi, thank you for a very interesting insight, Professor. Talking about film produced with mobile phone, what do you think about vertical cinema? I think some people have a habit for filming with smartphone using vertical style. So,
I think there's vertical film festivals, right, which are presented in a vertical way, which I think is like it's a creative disruption. It's doing something completely in a different way. And I think if you use in a vertical, there should be like a reason for that. And so if you're thinking about personal filmmaking, and if you make a portrait about someone, this is very much a portrait format, right? So also, if you think about 3 vertical screens next to each other, it almost makes 16:9. So you could sort of use this as a montage in a very interesting way. So my students, I always tell them, if you use vertical, use it coherently. If you use landscape, 16:9, use it coherently. And then, of course, I want them that they break these rules, because that's how we innovate. But I think if there's a reason for it, yes, of course, and why not? And that is sort of the traditional approach, I guess. But then we also see now suddenly the world of social media, TikTok, Instagram, or Instagram is maybe more 1:1, but 1:1 is more closer to 9:16 than 16:9, which I think these micro contents might be very useful to think about shorter stories, micro movies. That is maybe a world of vertical video where it has lots of advantages to think about work that's been presented on a mobile device rather than on a cinema screen, which I think the sort of argument that Sarah Atkinson and mobile cinematics put forward, that there's the mobile form as a screening device. And just to throw in like another reference to just like, not keeping short in time, thinking about the Lumiere cinematograph, the first camera ever. It was a camera and it was also a projector, right? And so the mobile phone is a camera, but also a very good screening device. Of course, not for feature films, but I don't know, would you watch TikTok in a cinema? Maybe soon, but I think that's a very interesting space to navigate. There was Dan mentioned the QB in the keynote. I think they went bust, but that was very much because of the COVID pandemic, because I think QB was great for being out and about, a commuter in New York, they watch movies, and that's, you get the vertical or the horizontal. But if you have no commuters, why watch it? Because if you're at home, you can watch a film on any of your devices, but if you're out and about, you normally don't walk around with a projector, so. Thank you, good question.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions in the chat box. Lucas Denny, not sure if you want to pose a question to Max yourself. Please turn on your camera, your mic if you want to. What's your question, Lucas Denny? If not, okay, I'll read it. Okay, so Max, this is the question from Lucas Denny. He says, Lucas, can smartphone filmmaking initiate the growth of local film festivals? Are there any experiences about this? And then it's a 2-part question. The second part is this new habit connected with the spreading of local or special issue through cinema?
There is a PhD research being done on mobile smartphone filmmaking in national cinemas by a colleague. If you email me, I'll email you his name, who I think his name. He first lived in Saudi Arabia, moved now back to the UK, and he looked into South Korea, how South Korea supported national smartphone filmmaking festivals to produce South Korean speaking films, and very much I think that's sort of what I mentioned before with France, and so I think yes, there's because that is a great way to create like a local culture and support development of localized content. And yeah, if you email me, I will forward you the references. And it's a new habit, spreading local. Yeah, I think it's what we can see. I think that people, I think probably like there's of course in terms of storytelling, there's these sort of like stories that we know that we've seen in the cinemas that it's on Netflix now, but I think there's lots more other things, and so which I think in localized ways I think is really exciting to see that we can see more than the sort of Western storytelling styles that are like out there in the world. And I think with emerging media, with smartphones, you can co-create these stories, like the project that Augustus was talking about, for instance. I think that is I find these things very exciting. I think also way more innovative, and yeah, really like bringing new elements to the diversifying storytelling. And the more voices are in the conversation, I think the better is this for understanding of the world. We are connected, now through Zoom. So yes, I think that supports us very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Max. So I'm going to move on to the next question by the chairperson of IMOVICCON, Lala Santiaputri, Balala. So she asked, would you categorize mobile filmmaking as the new entry level for filmmaking, or the new standard of filmmaking, or the future of popular filmmaking?
Yeah, really good question. So like I teach at the Swinburne University of Technology, and the students can sometimes come to us because they know Swinburne has like fantastic cameras, good ARRI Lexa cameras, Blackmagic cameras, and they go like, Max, why I want to come to learn filmmaking, now I have to do this with a mobile phone. And sort of my response is, if you can make a really great film in my class with a mobile phone, just imagine what you can do with another camera, right? And so, but then of course the question we said before is, like you don't carry an ARRI Lexa around with you all the time, and it's a very expensive tool. You want to be very precise. You don't want to take it into any location. with a smartphone, you can just explore more. And we can see some filmmakers that have a very, there's a long tradition of filmmaking that sort of moved to smartphones very much for their aesthetic choices, and then went back to making normal films. We see some smartphone filmmakers that are like, or mobile phone filmmakers that are like, Felipe Cardona in Colombia, or like also myself, we say, or Benoit Labodret in France. They say, no, this is our thing now. We work mainly with these sort of cameras, smartphones, mobile phones, or maybe like mobile cameras or drones, anything that is quite mobile in that respect. And so I think as an introduction, it's really great, because how do we learn? By experimenting, through experiential working. And so if you film with a mobile phone, and if something doesn't work out, you film and you'll become better, right? And you take some friends, go out and create a film. So I think it's a great way to skill up and to learn. And really also the key pitch line to my students is, there are so many filmmakers in the world. What is your creative voice? What makes you separate from all the other filmmakers? And that's, I think, we find out through experimental filmmaking. And so, of course, you can go back to traditional filmmaking, but if you have experienced smartphone filmmaking, I think it will make you think about the tools, technology in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I mean, use the tools that you have, right, to the greater, to contribute to the storytelling.
Sorry, it just came to mind. Gavin Wilson, that is a colleague who produced the research on smartphone film for international festivals. But if you email me, I will forward you the references anyhow. Just if Gavin listens to this, sorry, just a short timeout from my side.
Thank you, Max. I wish that we could continue this conversation. I have a ton more questions for you myself, but for those of you who continue to have questions for Max or thoughts, ideas, please feel free to email him, as he has invited you to. So I hope that you all continue to have a great conference. We'll come back here in about 15 minutes for the next sessions. Again, let's thank you, Max Schleser, our second keynote speaker for IMOVICCON.
Thank you.
Really fascinating stuff. And again, just want to reiterate, I'm so happy and honored to be here again with all of you. This has been an amazing conference. Again, thank you to the organizers, especially for making this conference possible during such a difficult time, during a pandemic, a global pandemic that continues, and especially one that is held in Jakarta, which, a lot of people are really suffering from COVID-19 in Indonesia right now. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening, watching, and participating. And Max, thank you for this amazing keynote.
I just want to say, like, if you want to reach out, please feel free to do so. So, thanks very much again for, that I could share my passion with you. It's Max Mobile on Twitter, if you want to touch base. And yeah, I looked through the chats, and it's really great to see some faces from some of you that I met 2 years ago. And so, yeah, thanks to you as a panel chair, also, like, great to meet you again. And reconnect with some other colleagues online through Zoom. And thanks for inviting me. It's really fantastic. I would have loved to now, like, have a great butterfish with you somewhere. But that will be another time. So thank you very much again for making this possible.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully in 2 more years we will meet each other.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Mr. Schleser and Mrs. Lasmana. Now we'll